Morning, everyone. Welcome to the first in our regulatory risk and compliance June webinars. Today's webinar is learnings from lockdown, and my name is Gordon Downey. I'll be your host for the next hour. We've got an excellent group of panelists joining me this morning, and I'll introduce them to you as we move along. I'm going to start, however, with just some preliminary remarks in relation to today's webinar. The main question I think we should really explore in this first of our series is how successfully regulators and other stakeholders, particularly those with competition or consumer mandates, have managed to factor in public health considerations to operating their mandates during the crisis. Now, that's particularly challenging where those considerations are imprecise or uncertain. I'm thinking about, for example, the injunction that we're familiar with now to do the right thing, which is a reasonably broad and quite uncertain concept, I think. Or where public health considerations are expressed in terms of guidance or recommendations rather than binding rules, which some of us find more reassuring. More broadly, I think the question is how successfully have regulators addressed the short and longer term economic implications of the COVID crisis, both as regards the economic impacts on regulated firms and on other stakeholders such as consumers. Regulators, as well as regulated firms and other stakeholders such as industry and consumer representative bodies, have had to grapple with policy challenges as to how their policy responsibilities and priorities should be handled in light of the crisis, and also governance challenges, how their decision-making structures and processes should adapt for crisis reasons. And all those challenges have had to be addressed in a situation which is at the same time unprecedented, urgent, and unpredictable. At the heart of many of these challenges lies the tricky balance between maintaining regulatory integrity and ensuring political accountability. The crisis has revealed various instances, such as price gouging behaviour, where, again, doing the right thing on the part of, for example, some of the platforms that we're familiar with may involve going beyond normally understood limits of business regulation. And so as we emerge gradually from lockdown, how should regulators deal with the effects of the various public health or economic interventions that have taken place, for example, to correct market distortions or restore rules or standards of conduct? And how quickly should they move in taking those steps? More broadly, what lessons across different sectors or different jurisdictions have regulators learned from the crisis, which may lead them to change their approach going forward, rather than necessarily reverting to the status quo? As a linked question, what lessons are we learning about the adequacy or resilience of the regulatory toolkit faced with systemic shocks like COVID? I thought before I move to our first speaker, I would just flash up that quote. There's a quote here from The Economist from last week, which is actually talking about the impact of COVID on the National Health Service. And what struck me in that quote were the remarks that, I thought I should just read it out, almost all prescriptions and primary care appointments now happen online, as do lots of outpatient ones. Doctors have been surprised by how well this works. Other changes, such as the retraining of specialists and increase in intensive care capacity, will become a permanent feature to protect against future waves of further waves of the virus. So I think that quite nicely captures the idea of both the innovation which we've seen as a result of the crisis, the need for innovation, and the embedding of perhaps longer term changes in the way that we work. And so I think that's quite a good way of opening up the next part of the discussion. So our first contributor this morning is Jenny Piper. Good morning, Jenny.
Morning, Gordon.
Jenny, thanks very much for joining us. Jenny became the Chief Executive of the utility regulator. That's Northern Ireland's economic regulator for energy and water in November of 2013. And she's made the organisation a more outward-looking and collaborative regulator, while at the same time robustly protecting Northern Ireland's energy and water consumers. Jenny oversaw the delivery of a new cross-border wholesale electricity market on the island of Ireland worth over 2 billion sterling, which went live in 2018. And she's also overseen the growth in the natural gas network across Northern Ireland and the investment necessary to meet government renewable generation targets. Jenny, if I can invite you to make your initial contribution, please.
Sure. Thanks, Gordon. And sorry that I can't appear on the screen along with the other presenters, but hopefully you can hear me okay. So I thought I would just say a little bit at the outset about the sort of the first half dozen things that the utility regulator had to deal with in the initial couple of weeks after lockdown, in that immediate response, and then we can sort of tease out where that got us in terms of regulatory precedent and risk and how we've moved on. I think the very first thing that we did was require all of our regulated companies and all of our suppliers to provide us with details of their business continuity plans. That was nearly the first thing that we did before we even put in place all the arrangements for our own staff to work remotely. Because that information, that original information request, gave us a huge amount of intelligence about how well prepared all of our companies in the electricity, gas and water sectors were. That information then was shared with our lead department, the Department for the Economy. And for me, that's the first big change, that signalled the first big change between pre-COVID regulation and post-COVID regulation, if I can put it like that. Mm-hmm. And that was the need to work much more closely with government than was the case before COVID. And that's been a theme which I'll talk about a little bit as we go on. But that initial sharing of information, contacts and intelligence, I think was quite critical to calm the nerves in the department and amongst ministers. We moved very quickly then to put our own internal arrangements to allow people to work from home. We didn't have everyone on laptops, so had to try and find workaround solutions for the 95, 96 odd staff to facilitate home working. And that worked reasonably well within a couple of weeks. I think probably the next key stage, and it came 2 weeks into 10 days, maybe into lockdown, we agreed with the department that we would convene a consumer forum, online obviously, but involving suppliers, the network operators, the consumer representative groups and the department, to really try and make sure that we had a single channel for communication, that we didn't have companies going off on their own making statements about what they were doing or not doing, ministers going off and, as ministers do, looking for platforms to make announcements. We agreed with the department that we would convene everyone and try and get agreed messaging, agreed next steps, and have everybody, essentially all the key players, in the room. That has worked extremely well. We've had some heated discussions, I'm sure you can imagine, but it allowed for a coherence around messaging, and it allowed us and then the department to put up on our web pages very clear, easy Q&A about what was happening what suppliers were doing, where the contact numbers were, where the helplines were. And that was something that we agreed and developed very, very quickly, because we had everybody bought into it right at the outset. That bit of comms and coordination, I think, has stood us in good stead. Now, we're lucky in Northern Ireland. We don't have huge numbers. We only have 8 electricity suppliers, 6 gas suppliers, 3 or 4 generators. So we're not talking huge numbers, and that, I think, is one of the advantages of our small scale. But we moved then very quickly to try and understand where problems were arising. And the biggest issue that seemed to be coming through from many of our network companies was how they would deal with complaints and disputes. So we took a decision to suspend our complaints policy during the period of the pandemic. 2 reasons. One, we weren't really resourced to properly handle complaints and disputes in the normal way with remote working arrangements. And secondly, the companies were struggling a bit with it as well in terms of understanding their own priorities. So we simply suspended that. We will look at this whenever restrictions are sufficiently lifted and we get back to, quote, normal regulation, whatever that will be. But in the meantime, we are simply logging any issues and we're not proceeding with them. And that brought quite a bit of goodwill from the regulated companies, as you might imagine.
Yes.
It extended into ongoing compliance and enforcement work with a number of companies, particularly those companies where we were working with them, for example, with a regulatory audit. We agreed with them that the validity of auditing over the COVID period might be distortive, and therefore we indicated to them that we would take a pragmatic approach. Yeah. And again, that was welcomed. We didn't say we wouldn't consider it. We simply said we'll be pragmatic. That all seemed to be working well. We weren't experiencing very many problems. Our generators were expressing some concern about whether they'd be able to go ahead with planned outages over the summer. But we took a pretty hard line over that. We had quite a bit of work to do with the department to get them to accept that they were the ones with the emergency powers should there be a problem with any of the generators. That stepped us from regulation into the backup legislative powers for the department to issue directions. That was an interesting discussion. Some of the generators were exceptionally keen for the emergency powers to be put in place, but thankfully we weren't seeing the number of COVID cases accelerate to the stage where there was a real problem. So we have taken a hard line with the generators in terms of proceeding with their outages. We expect them to proceed and take their outages over the summer. Yeah. And not to defer them, apart from anything else, to defer them to the autumn, apart from it being not a good time as you come into the winter. But there's always the risk of a second wave. So that, I think, was probably the point at which we put on our policeman's hat as the regulator again, rather than our more collaborative hat. And we kept that policeman's hat on, and I'll finish on this. We kept that hat on when we published a regulatory letter for our network companies, our regulated companies, suggesting to them that the job retention allowance scheme, the furlough scheme, that we did not expect our regulated companies to access that scheme. We weren't prohibiting it. It was obviously entirely a matter for individual companies, but given the regulatory certainty which regulated network companies have, we thought it was a difficult ask that they would benefit from the furlough scheme and also have the benefit of a RAB and the regulatory certainty from customers that status brings them. That caused us some problems, but actually it has worked pretty well, and we don't believe any of our network companies have furloughed staff. Some of our suppliers have. So we're through all of those immediate actions. and we're now into the stage where we're doing a lot of monitoring, and I can talk later about some of the monitoring metrics, the additional monitoring that we're doing, and the work that we're doing in conjunction with other regulators in the UKRN network. But hopefully that gives you a flavour of some of the actions that we've had to take, and we've been fortunate. We haven't seen any real crises. No suppliers have gone under, but the big issue, of course, facing all of us now is the potential of the debt tidal wave, because the Northern Ireland economy has really been very, very badly hit. The whole economy has been badly hit, but for example, unemployment up 90% between April and May. The economic fall in Northern Ireland in the last quarter has been twice that of the UK. So, we are expecting that while we may have weathered this particular bit of the storm, that's actually not where our focus is going to have to be.
Thank you, Jenny. Huge amount there for us to touch you over. And while we're doing that, I'd like to bring in our next presenter this morning, who is Ed Dodman. Ed comes from an interesting background, both telecoms and water, from senior roles in BT and also Thames Water. He's now, however, the first director of regulatory affairs at Ombudsman Services, where he joined in October of last year. For those who don't know, Ombudsman Services operates as the sole ombudsman in the energy sector, and at least I think that's in GB, and it's approved by Ofgem as such, and operates one of two ombudsman schemes in the communications sector. And Ed's role involves ensuring that Ombudsman Services takes account of changing political and regulatory environments to investigate unresolved complaints in a way that is both that's favorable to consumers and also suppliers. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Ed.
Thanks, Gordon, and thank you for having me here today. It's a real pleasure to be here at the first event, and I hope I can give a slightly different perspective on things. As you alluded to, we operate mainly but not exclusively in energy and communications. So most of what I say will cover those markets. But as you said, I have a bit of background in water as well. So I think some of the themes that I'll hopefully pick out are quite relevant across the markets. I wanted to touch on three themes briefly. Firstly, my personal observations of how regulation has adapted to the crisis, including a bit about what we did at Ombudsman Services. Secondly, whether that approach tells us anything about the existing environment and relationship between companies and regulators, because I think how we see both sides approaching it can tell us something about what the underlying, regulatory conditions have been.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, what learnings are there for policy going forwards? So I suppose I've got I suppose as an ombudsman, not only do we resolve individual complaints for customers, but we also use that insight to support policymakers, regulators, and indeed companies to make better decisions for customers. So I suppose I've got that hat on a bit today as well. I would just echo what both you and Jenny have said already, that this was a totally unprecedented event, and I think it's particularly important for essential services and utilities who value continuity of supply more than anything else. And so I think something that threatened that is clearly a very, very big deal. And in that context, it would be really easy to criticise regulators over whether they went too quickly, too slowly, too heavy-handed, or didn't do enough. And my view on the round is that given the magnitude of the disruption, they did pretty well to bring their industries with them quickly, particularly given how many stakeholders involved. If you look, and I have some experience in previous lives of this, if you look how long some regulatory engagement has taken in the past over things like price controls, I think what they managed to achieve in a short amount of time was quite impressive, really. And that can't have been easy. How do you regulate given different companies were and remain in very different circumstances? Was it reasonable, for example, to penalise a company for not foreseeing the problems that COVID could bring to, say, an offshoring or an outsourcing strategy? We work with companies who have call centres in South Africa, India. I mean, it was hard enough. I struggled to keep up day to day what was going on in the UK. So how companies managed to keep the control of what was happening internationally, I don't know. So I suppose that was another challenge for regulators. In terms of overall approach, I think to focus on doing the right thing, whatever that means, for the most vulnerable, was the right thing to do. And that's what we did too. So we prioritised complaints from the most vulnerable customers, and where necessary, we allowed our participating companies to do the same if they were particularly struggling. Just a final observation on, I suppose, what the approach, my observations of the approach and what that told us. What it really brought home to us, actually, also is some of the gaps that still exist in consumer protection. So, to give you an example, unlike the financial ombudsman, we're not able to accept complaints from SMEs. We can only accept on the business side from micro businesses. And actually, what we saw following lockdown was we were contacted by quite a considerable number of SMEs who we couldn't help and had to turn away. And these were companies who had a particularly urgent issue, couldn't get through to their company, and were looking for someone else to help them. So, as we've been looking at this approach slightly differently as well, and looking at what has it told us about some of the gaps that exist in protection today. That's clearly a major issue for businesses, in particular going forward.
Yeah.
So secondly, what does it say about the existing regulatory setup? So I think the first few weeks were characterised by really constructive effort across the industries to reach this agreement, but is there something underlying that it tells us about the relationship? I think it was interesting, Ofgem in particular came under a lot of pressure to provide guidance quite quickly on what was and wasn't allowed. I suppose to ask a deliberately challenging but seemingly simple question, in the ideal regulatory environment, shouldn't companies already be doing the right thing for their customers? So why was this intervention needed in a way? And I suppose looking forward, I'm wondering if the flexibility to be able to do the right thing at the right time could in some way be a more intrinsic part of the regulatory framework.
Yeah.
It would obviously be really interesting to know what comfort suppliers have taken from the don't worry as long as you do the right thing guidance. And I suppose ultimately we won't know until it plays out and companies start making claims against that commitment. Just a final observation on the approach. I think it's really interesting that this looser, more principled approach of do the right thing is actually active at a time when arguably the risk is highest. In a way, you'd expect the converse to be true. And I suppose, again, thinking forward, if such an approach is good enough now, shouldn't it also be good enough when the risk is reduced and we come out of COVID?
Yeah.
So just finally then, going forwards, I suppose echoing what Jenny said, it feels like we're past the easy bit now. And when COVID subsides, and the lockdown subsides, we too in our markets will have its legacy. And there's some huge issues, broadly I think in two camps. You've got the micro view, which is how do you deal with individual customers who've had special dispensation, for example, payment holidays? How do you make sure you're not just kicking that can down the road? And secondly, in the macro, if we see this economic depression that we're predicting, and it's hard to see otherwise, that will present a whole raft of new challenges, and I think regulators need to get on the front foot here. I think actually that those challenges in themselves will be a really good test of whether we take forward some of that more principled approach or whether simply the elastic band snaps back into how it was before, as Jenny described it, normal regulation, whatever that is.
Yes.
And then very finally, we do some work with government and regulators looking a bit more broadly about some of the bigger challenges. So, for example, around net zero. And I think it's really interesting to think about how this has affected some of those issues. I suppose beyond the practical of potentially pushing things back, it's really interesting to think about how we might build on some of the trust that we have built up during this period. Companies on the whole have acted well towards their customers. And given how important trust and confidence is for those challenges like net zero, I think it's going to be really important for regulators to make sure that companies don't come out looking like the bad guys from this. To give an example, it's not necessarily energy companies' fault if customers end up in energy poverty. These issues are much, much broader. And so I think we need to think about how we maintain some of the trust and confidence that we built up during this period.
Yeah.
that was it for me for now, Gordon. Hope that was interesting.
That's really, really useful, and particularly just to pick up your final remark about net zero. One of the ways that this series will work is I think there'll be a flow through our webinars, and next week when we look at rethinking regulatory priorities, the net zero commitments, sustainability challenge will be front and centre. So that's a nice advert for next week. So thanks for those. So again, what's the food for thought there? What we know is before we open up the conversation, I will introduce our third contributor this morning, my colleague Natasha Durkin in our markets group. Natasha is specialist investigations and enforcement lawyer, working predominantly in the regulated energy sector, wider experience and in particular her expertise relates to providing strategic advice during complex and high-profile investigations. And in addition to that, she has considerable expertise in advising on environmental, social and governance. So, Natasha, can I ask you to take your time?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the previous contributions that are really, really interesting, and hopefully the remarks I have will have a slightly different context again in the previous contribution. So I've just got a couple of bullet points. The first one, as a lawyer, the major challenge that we've had since the crisis started is navigating what has now become and will become an increasingly complicated mix of legal rules, new ones, emergency legislation, the architecture of the Coronavirus Act, plus guidance that's different north border, and guidance on many occasions further than the legal rules themselves. So that has produced significant uncertainty across the board and for lawyers as well about how you advise clients and in relation to compliance with this more relaxed, do the right thing, regulatory environment that's been the response to COVID, which is really welcome and absolutely right. But my perspective is that as we go through relaxation, this level of uncertainty and the difficulties of navigating relaxation if you're in a regulated sector increase. And the reason for that is, for example, in Scotland, each phase of relaxation is underpinned completely with guidance, which has been agreed with industry and with sectors. There is guidance. There may be some tweaking of the legal rules, and understanding how that guidance fits with existing obligations, whether or not the health and safety obligations or regulatory obligations, I think is in itself a real challenge. The way that we've been starting to discuss it as a group of lawyers in Shepherd is around what does that look like, trying to think about compliance in a way that really is going to fit with those that need to comply with or lack regulatory environment, and one that's going to change as we move out of lockdown. So some of the ingredients are, it's got to be rapid. It's got to be capable of evolution, and in a way, I think that it just has to be different from what we've seen before. And what I think the key ingredient really to the compliance are understanding the evolving risks of your business or your organisation, and prioritising that in a way which makes sense as we hopefully relax out of the lockdown and whatever the new normal actually is. But prioritisation and robust prioritisation is clearly key to that. And where we see this interesting issue around compliance sitting is between, there's going to be an ongoing need for sure to evidence and to document what's happening and what the decisions are that are being taken and how they're being taken, what's being considered, you're considering the right stuff if you're a regulated entity. But there is, we think, a difference between that approach and what we would call granular documenting. Everything being in a spreadsheet, everything being considered in a very almost laborious way. And I think our view would be that as we start to evolve and the regulatory relationship start to change, and that kind of approach, something around that is going to be much more in keeping with what the regulatory landscape is likely to be, because it feels unlikely that we would just snap back into a very prescriptive environment. So I think that has challenges for lawyers, but it also has challenges for everybody in the regulated sector to think through how we actually go about understanding what the priorities are in that much more kind of in a way responsible approach to compliance, and much more confident as well. So I think it's a huge challenge, I think, for everybody who thinks about regulation, but one that may actually result in much better regulation overall. So those were my introductory remarks. Dr. Feingold.
Thanks very much, Natasha. Just a word to our panel. We've got a feedback in the line for our audience. If you're not speaking, if you can mute your audio on your device, that would be appreciated. I'll wave if you forget to take the talk when you're picking up the conversation. So thanks, all three of you, for those thoughts. I wonder if we perhaps a good place to begin the conversation is on this question of doing the right thing. Called DRT regulation. And what we think of that, I think everyone is saying roughly the same thing or similar things about DRT, which is it's a good thing. The question is how DRT can be made to work in an enduring way. We've proved this collectively DRT works. So what do we need to make sure keep working beyond the crisis scenario maybe Jenny, I can come back to you. With that question, if you like. How do we preserve that DRT working going forward?
Well, I was really interested in what Ed was saying, but also what Natasha was saying about evidence. And I think this point surely regulated companies should be doing the right thing anyway, prioritizing customers and making sure that customers are at the forefront of their working. But as a regulator, the reality is that is simply not the case. Otherwise, why would you need regulation? One of the things that we have put in place to try and help us make sure that companies continue to do the right thing is at the start of lockdown, started to ask for some additional information to be part of the regulatory returns from all our companies. companies. We clearly had some baseline metrics, but we asked the companies to start and give us more information about customer behaviour. So numbers looking forward, new debt payment plans, numbers of direct debit cancellations, percentage of customers numbers in of debt, customers,
indicating that they were having
technical problems like top-ups,
disconnections, attendance
to call-outs, all those sorts of things, a level of granularity in terms of metrics that we hadn't previously asked for.
I think all of our thinking
there was
those metrics might
help give us early warning of
supplier difficulty,
might give us some more intelligence
numbers
of vulnerable
customers
really struggling,
but also give us an evidence base to help make sure that in going forward post-COVID, we've got some
additional
evidence
to use
in terms of our price controls,
in terms of our licenses and our codes and so on, to help encourage companies to build on what they've done during the pandemic, and not just rely on it, but because they did it and it was well received,
everybody played their
part in the war.
I don't think any
regulated company just to continue to do the right thing without some additional encouragement.
And I would want to phrase it very much as encouragement because we have seen a good level of cooperation.
But there have been a few outliers. So, for example, we've a lot of customers in Northern Ireland on
prepayment meters.
It's not a social hardship issue in Northern Ireland. It's a payment method of choice.
And we discovered
early on that
small number
of vulnerable customers
who were
shielding
were
worried about being able to do physical top-ups that are required. We can't top up gas prepayment meters here online. There has to be a physical van.
And that was a worry for people who can't
get out of the house.
It actually was
the electricity network company that came to the rescue in terms of being willing to do those top-ups on behalf of vulnerable customers.
So that's
shown a little bit of a light on some of our gas network companies.
Now,
it
was great that the electricity
network operator stepped up to the plate and their meter readers
who weren't able to do their
normal meter reading business were able to help with that.
But I think
we need a little bit of encouragement,
a bit of carrot and stick
with our gas network companies to do the right thing, and we seem to do the right thing going forward, rather than just trusting them that there's this esprit de corps at the moment.
So let's just see how it goes.
We'll try and build on the collaboration.
But I'm very taken by what Natasha was saying about having a good evidence base for what we do going forward. I agree that that's going to be a critical piece of regulation.
Hey, do you want to come in again? There's some thoughts on that point.
I'm happy to. It's very easy, Gordon, isn't it, for people like you and me to say regulation should have more of do the right thing, and then Jenny quite rightly says, well, how on earth do I operationalise that? We can't just let companies go off and do it, and she's absolutely right, of course. And there is in my mind actually some benefits to a more mechanical approach. This isn't one way is better than the other necessarily. The advantage to a more prescriptive mechanical approach is that it to some extent takes the personal side out of it. And of course, the big problem with do the right thing is Jenny's view and my view and your view might be very different things on what do the right thing is. And we'll see when we come out of COVID how different the company's view of what do the right thing what compared to how the regulator viewed it.
Yeah.
But I do think there is something about how we. I think it's the big question in regulation at the moment, actually, and it leads into things like the social purpose agenda that Ofwat are looking at the moment. If you can figure out how to get DRT into a
regulatory environment, then I think
we'd really take regulation forward in this country. I think it's one of the big outstanding questions. I think we've seen a little example of it through something like vulnerability. Vulnerability has gone up on all of the agendas of companies and regulators.
And again, it's something that suffers a bit from the fact that my view of vulnerability might be very different to yours, and there are different
things.
types of companies.
And I think one of the criticisms sometimes with companies is it's incredibly hard to operationalise it. It's very easy for someone to say, look after your vulnerable customers, but actually where many companies come from, they need a bit more than that, don't they? And I think the same will be true inevitably of do the right thing. It wouldn't be enough to simply say that. There would have to be some way of articulating it, and I haven't heard a properly convincing answer of how we can do that properly going forward. So I don't have any answers, I'm afraid. It just strikes me that there is something in the way the regulators and companies and other stakeholders have interacted over the last few months which shouldn't be lost coming out of this.
Yeah. Natasha, more questions from you?
I don't have any answers. But it is really striking that we're the debate between prescriptive rules and a regulator is continuing on during this crisis. I suppose ultimately one of the problems if you're not the regulator there needs to be some sort of certainty around what the standards are and what the expectations are, and some way of articulating that.
Gordon, it's Jenny. If I just one
last thought on this.
One of the things that has struck me over the last 8-10 weeks has been the convening power of the regulator, our ability to provide a forum for government, third sector, consumer representatives, business bodies, and the key energy players themselves. A forum for them to come together and talk about the issues and hear directly what the consumer bodies are saying about experiences, not about individual experiences, about trends, about common themes and problems. And this is something, again, it's easier in Northern Ireland to feel than elsewhere. That convening power has struck me. I don't think we've ever had such a wide-ranging forum with all of the key stakeholders in the room talking about how best to address consumer issues. That's something that we will definitely continue. And having government in the room, initially I was slightly concerned that might inhibit discussion and dialogue and might overlap or might impact on the regulator or the independence of the regulator. But actually it has built confidence and trust with government, which is going to be really going to be needed as we move into the more difficult phases, where government is going to be faced with some very, very difficult challenges about how to deal with hardship and debt and recovery. That convening power is something I had underestimated.
I think that's absolutely right. Just reflecting on that point, touching on what Natasha said, I think that this idea of DRT doing the right thing and the critical goal for that being a sense of collective ownership of issues. And your point about convening power resonates with that. This is very much about a trite approach where people are jointly responsible for solving problems rather than, for example, a regulator or the minister or whatever, listening politely and then doing what they decide to do. And people feel less empowered as a result of that approach. Something where there's more shared responsibility might well move us along. We can move along in a better way. I'd like to look in the I think this is perhaps the last part of the conversation with a meaty topic, and it's been touched on by everyone so far. When it comes to feedback as well. The question is where the buck stops, because ultimately there is an economic cost here, an economic cost in doing the right thing. we've seen lots of examples of people rising to challenge and doing things. I think, for example, in telecoms context, data limits have been lifted to allow access to telecommunication services. People have done the right thing there, and there's been all sorts of steps taken to protect customers. All these things have a cost. Jenny, you made the point earlier about job retention scheme. There's a suspicion perhaps of how regulatory firms are recovering their costs for doing the right thing or getting through this process. Obviously, some firms are very significantly impacted in perhaps in the energy companies, for example, telecom are not. I think, for example, the airline sector, or for that rail sector, where there's some huge questions about economic sustainability raised by the crisis, and who, as I put it, whom does the buck stop for those sorts of things? Is it the customer? Is it the shareholder? Is it the taxpayer? Not expecting a short answer to that question, or any answer. But it would be really good to go back again, just to conclude this morning's discussion with a conversation about buck stopping. Jenny.
Well, I think, and I reflect a little bit on some of the dialogue and discussion with colleagues in the UK regulators network. I think we do need government to step forward here with joined up solutions, and there is a bit of a theme emerging of government looking to regulators to solve the problems. I think we are part of the solution, but I think there's a real need for the challenges to be looked at across the piece. In Northern Ireland, we've been able to build through the pandemic very good relationships with the Department for Communities, and their volunteering scheme linked to local government. And some of those linkages will be really helpful as we try and plot a way forward, particularly in relation to fuel poverty, which is a big issue for us in Northern Ireland. But there isn't a great line of dialogue between the Department for Communities at times and the Department for the Economy. And again, we are sitting facing both business consumers and domestic consumers, and of course the energy industry. So again, back to that, I can see the regulators providing useful fora for dialogue between the government departments, help get joined up solutions, including some of the regulatory mechanisms that we might have, and we haven't seen suppliers go into difficulty yet. But if we have persistent levels of debt, particularly from the non-domestic sector, then I wouldn't be surprised if we do see one or two suppliers fall over. So that continues to be a concern. I am slightly anxious that there is an emerging theme from central government to Northern Ireland government that over to the regulators to provide solutions and take the companies these well-off energy companies with huge profits regulated or pick them and get them to do more philanthropic. I think that's far too simplistic, and it'll have to be a very well coordinated approach, which I can see KRN now trying to facilitate. Again, I think it comes back to what I was saying before. There has to be good evidence of where the problems are and what solutions there might be. And nobody has a silver bullet here. So the regulator's got to be in the room. But ultimately there's going to have to be ongoing supply of government support and money to make it happen. But more importantly than that, there's got to be better joined-up policy. That might be again that might be something we can manage in Northern Ireland. Or you may be able to manage in Scotland more easily than other parts of the UK.
Yeah. It's time to you for your Cuppensworth.
Yeah, thank you. I would support everything that Jenny's just said. I think it has to be a joined-up approach, and I think what's encouraging perhaps the wrong word, but if we look at who's shared the burden so far, it is across all stakeholders, I'd say. The companies certainly have. You alluded to a couple of things in comms where companies have gone sort of above and beyond what we might normally expect. Customers are certainly taking some of the burden, in their individual circumstances, and indeed something we see. Customers recognising that actually some issues might have to wait, and we've seen customer acceptance there, and government clearly is doing what it thinks is right to support the economy. And this time we'll see that that continues, and whether the political ramifications of that alter things in the future. I think clearly, a lot of the issues that we will experience going forward will be economic ones that result from the approach taken by government during this crisis. So I think government has a responsibility to follow through and look at the impacts of that. I think just one final thought, that the question of who pays is really important, but the question of who the public thinks are paying is equally important. I was thinking about this earlier, and sort of the narrative that the person in the street has been told about their utility providers over the past few years. A couple of years ago, and indeed the narrative leading up to this crisis has been your company, if we take energy for example, your energy company has been ripping you off. That's why we're introducing default tariffs. So customers have been told, rightly or wrongly, for a while, that they're being ripped off by some of their companies. We now face the situation where a lot of those companies are struggling, and indeed may well receive some kind of intervention or government support. And so customers have been told companies are ripping them off. Now some companies are struggling. What does that look like going forward? What does the customer perceive, and how do we make sure that all the blame isn't put on the wrong people, i.e. companies? It's from putting my regulatory hat on again. It's going to be really important and interesting to manage the customers' views of things like the regulatory interventions. We've got several water companies going to the CMA at the moment looking to review their prices. How do we manage some of the customer perception of these activities, these regulatory activities, which may well be perfectly justified, but don't particularly add to the view that we're all in this together?
We're just listening to the bottom line, the radio program, and they were talking about I've forgotten his name. Anyway, the presenter was talking about the three S's at the end of the Second World War. We're looking at that parallel, not hugely opposite. Some S's were in the Second World War: spirit, science, and settling scores, and in terms of the collective, the role that science and technology played out of the post-war crisis, but also the settling scores thing, the idea there needing to be some sort of reckoning. I think it's from what you just said about how you actually reposition the public perception of funds within that I can call it bullying culture that we might have been living through before the crisis. Anyway, Natasha, what are your thoughts about this?
I only had one other comment in relation to picking up those points around blame and repositioning, which I think are extremely interesting. How that becomes how that flushes out, because seems to be undoubtedly the case is that to get anywhere back to normal, we really all are going to have to play our part in the dynamic of, picking on whoever it might be, energy supplies or whoever, the kind of bad actor doesn't sit well with that. Just a model that's just not going to work. And allied to that, the regulatory model increasingly some sectors in the UK, which has been underpinned by massive ramping up of fines and financial penalties, also seems to me to be something that really needs to be reconsidered, because that's certainly in the real economic devastation that we face as a country and as people, that approach is really must run out of steam quite quickly, I would think. Which leads to interesting issues around how you change behaviour and all the rest of it. But those would be my immediate thoughts.
Yeah. Well, that's been fascinating. That final part, with Ireland towards 9:30. I'd like to give each of you a chance to say anything about closing remarks. That country, not necessarily just any other closing remarks you might have, reflecting on the discussion this morning. I'll go back to Jennifer to kick us off with those closing remarks.
Sure. Well, I think one of the other big learnings for us over the last few weeks has been around technology and our dependence on technology, whether that's for meetings, webinars, or discussions with stakeholders, or whatever, the access to the right technology to facilitate dialogue and meetings has been very interesting, and many of us have gone through the torture of having two or three significant meetings in one day, feeling like we're glued to the screen. But it has facilitated communication and dialogue, and a lot of flexibility in terms of getting a lot of people to be convened quite quickly to hot house difficult issues. And I think that's going to be really useful going forward, and maybe will help a bit with some of the resilience. But there have been other technological issues that haven't been as helpful to us. Where we've had poor broadband access, where we haven't got flexibility around our metering system in Northern Ireland. I think we're going to have to look again at how we use technology, how we depend on it. And that's going to be true for all of our working and home lives. But I think there are opportunities for regulators to be a lot more flexible and a lot more agile, particularly in some of our decision making. We all love our lengthy papers and our lengthy consultations, we might be able to find more flexible ways of moving forward on issues based on the experience that we've had over the last few weeks. I think technology is going to be a help to us going forward.
That's your thoughts.
I suppose just very briefly, the one I would probably leave people with is that there might be a very understandable tendency now with sort of getting over the COVID peak to think job done and that's it. Actually, I think the magnitude of problems, though they may be more spread out and dispersed, will be equally, if not a greater challenge coming out of this. Problems around debt and all of the issues that economic problems will bring to our industry. So I think it's an encouragement really that the hard work in a way starts now, and it wouldn't be the right thing to do to wait for that to happen before we think about how we tackle some of the issues we know are going to come up.
Don't think realistic. And Natasha, any final thoughts from yourself?
I would just absolutely echo that the initial crisis period was difficult, but actually it's going to be much more challenging moving through. And underpinning all of that, a big issue around trust between regulatory sectors for this to be effective.
Yeah. I think that trust is at the heart of it. So I think then just first of all thank our three contributors, Jenny, Ed, and Sasha, very much for all of your thoughts and your wisdom today and the conversation attempted to have. I think switched a lot of light bulbs on for me. Colleagues who listened in as well. As I mentioned earlier on, this is the first of our series of webinars this month. We will be moving on. I've popped up onto the slide. Moving on to looking at regulatory priorities, for example, net zero in our next session, and then looking on further to issues around compliance burdens. Perhaps we'll come back to talking about DRT and what that might mean in operational terms. Looking at disruptive technology and innovation in the ultimate session, and then finally looking at something like a fair deal in the next moment. So hopefully people will be able to join us for the future sessions. I think all that thank you all for joining us this morning with this session. And thanks again to our panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Gordon.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.